NATO summit has come to a close with new security guarantees and renewed financial support for Ukraine. And while Kyiv did not get a time frame for membership, something it desperately wanted, it did receive a seat at the inaugural meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council. The mood on the second day certainly more upbeat, as Ukrainian President Zelenskyy and NATO leaders try to downplay divisions. John Beaver is live for us in Vilnius. John, what is the latest?
Yeah, I think, as you say, really the headline news today was that NATO-Ukraine Council. NATO very much selling that as Ukraine being on more of an equal footing with NATO now. So that council, they can get together, Ukraine can call these meetings, they can discuss issues and concerns, they can share information as well. So I think that really is what NATO was selling as a huge development today. But they have, as you say, stopped short of promising full NATO membership for Ukraine just yet. All involved do want Ukraine to join NATO, but they disagree on the timeline. We have countries such as Germany and the United States saying there needs to be a bit more caution. We need to just wait a bit. One of the reasons for that is not wanting to antagonize Russia. And the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg saying as well that when it comes to NATO membership, it's not to do with timelines, it's to do with making sure that a series of criteria are fulfilled, and Ukraine and their president has said they are working towards fulfilling those criteria as well.
And John, while Zelenskyy didn't get a time frame for NATO membership, he probably got the second best thing, all these security guarantees.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of those came from the G7 nations. So this, of course, a separate group of some of the world's wealthiest nations, countries such as the US, the UK, Canada and Germany and those sorts of countries. And they have promised a framework that really solidifies their support for Ukraine and really lays a framework for that sort of support. And just in terms of some of the promises that have been made during this summit, we have Germany providing Patriot missile launchers and Leopard tanks, thousands of rounds of artillery. We have the UK providing 70 combat and logistical vehicles, £50 million worth of support for battlefield repairs, those sorts of things. So although President Zelenskyy didn't get that NATO membership he was hoping for, or a time frame for that membership, he got a renewed promise of support from NATO members for this ongoing conflict with Russia.
All right, John, thank you very much. Let's turn now to Jamie Shea. He's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges at NATO and joins us from London. Jamie, how significant are these G7 security guarantees for Ukraine? How much of a win is this for Zelenskyy, considering he didn't get what he wanted the most, a time frame for NATO membership?
Good evening. I think it is significant for Zelenskyy. It certainly means he's not going back to Kiev empty-handed. In fact, far from it, as your correspondent just pointed out. What this is, in fact, is a commitment by some of the biggest allies, the United States, the UK, Germany, France, Italy, etc., in the G7, to supply Ukraine with a train and equip military program for many years after the war is ended, which means to say that once the conflict is over, then those NATO countries will make sure that they continue to send advanced military equipment to Ukraine, to train its army, to make it interoperable with NATO, so that frankly Putin would never be in a position where he could realistically try to invade ever again, because Ukraine would be fully capable of mounting its own defense and deterrence. But at the same time, the G7 countries were very aware not to present that as an alternative to NATO membership, but as a kind of bridging mechanism which will take Ukraine through the period until that NATO membership becomes possible. So to some degree, it's a kind of NATO light, if I can use that phrase for Zelenskyy, but it certainly means that he's got this assurance of long-term support even beyond the current conflict.
And Jamie, are these commitments, this G7 declaration, a done deal, if you will, or do the terms still have to be negotiated between various countries and Ukraine?
Well, certainly in terms of, what kind of equipment will Ukraine need after the war, what kind of training, how interoperable will it be with NATO, what will it need in air defense and missile defense? You're absolutely right. Those issues remain to be resolved because overwhelmingly, of course, everybody now in the alliance is focusing on getting Ukraine through the war. As the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has said, if Ukraine loses the war to Russia and doesn't survive as a democratic Western oriented state, then the whole issue of NATO membership becomes moot, and EU membership as well. So the short term really holds the key to the long term, and one has to be practical. For example, if you've got two Leopard 2 tanks to give to Ukraine, you're not going to say to Kiev, oh, one tank is for the short term conflict, but the other tank you can't use. You have to keep it in reserve for after the war for the security guarantees. Of course, that would be completely irrational. So I think all of the equipment that's going to Ukraine now will be for winning the war. Once that war is over, in terms of exactly what kind of peace we have, where Russia is, where Ukraine is, where NATO is, then of course those countries providing those security guarantees will have to look at what gaps there still are and how they're going to fill them. But on the other hand, NATO membership could happen rather quickly, and therefore those bilateral security guarantees may never need to be taken up.
Jamie, I have to ask you about comments from your, well, I should say UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace, who said people want to see gratitude from President Zelenskyy. Of course, his comments were in response to a blistering criticism from Zelenskyy on Tuesday, basically being very critical of NATO for not giving a specific timeline for a NATO membership. How is that playing out, or how do you think that will play out? It certainly didn't seem to be an issue today with such a drastic change in tone and mood and language from Zelenskyy, where he in fact did seem to be grateful.
Yes, he did thank the NATO allies for the support he's been given. Look, if I were president of a country being attacked, trying to defend itself heroically, I would do the same as Zelenskyy. You would do the same. You'd be pushing as hard as you possibly could to get as much as you possibly could. You would be upping the ante, and you wouldn't be ashamed about doing so. That's the job of a Ukrainian president. I noted what Ben Wallace said, a bit of a storm in a teacup. And if I was to see him tonight in London, I would say to him, dear Defence Minister Wallace, do remember that in 1940, a desperate United Kingdom facing Nazi Germany alone after the fall of France turned to the United States and also made desperate appeals to Washington at that time for American destroyers, for American credit. It became known as cash and carry and lend lease. So let's be honest, we've all been in this kind of situation. When you're a country at war, you may take a rather exaggerated tone on an occasion, but I think we should all understand that, and I would declare this definitely as a storm in a teacup.
All right, a storm in a teacup. Thank you, Jamie Shea.